I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Kids screaming, music blasting, somebody yelled, "Cannonball!" And water crashed over concrete edges onto Texas dirt. Right there in the middle of my south pasture was a swimming pool built over my son's grave. I'd just driven 11 hours from Oklahoma, where I'd spent 11 weeks watching my father die in hospice. We buried him 3 days before. I came home expecting silence and found 50 strangers swimming over Luke. No letter, no warning, no sheriff's notice, nothing. Just a pool party on my land, on my son's resting place, in full celebration. I stood there with my boots sunk in Texas dirt, staring at blue chlorinated water sitting where my boy had been resting 12 years. Then I saw the oak tree past the shallow end. Luke planted that tree at 16, said it'd shade cattle someday. Now it was shading a cedar pergola with Bluetooth speakers. And standing dead center of it all in white slacks holding a champagne flute was Linda Mercer, president of Willow Creek Estates HOA. She looked right at me, smiled, raised her glass, and said, "Welcome home, Cole." That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not rage, something colder. I've spent 40 years fixing diesel engines and irrigation pumps. When something breaks bad enough, you don't panic, you stop, you look, you figure out exactly what failed. So I looked. Concrete edges, plumbing lines, retaining walls. Months of construction built carefully while I sat beside my dying father holding his hand. My neighbor Phyllis pressed a flyer into my hands without a word. Willow Creek Community Aquatic Center, grand opening, family fun. They hadn't hidden it. They'd celebrated it. And standing there with my father 3 days in the ground and my son buried under 20,000 gallons of chlorinated water, I made myself one promise. They were going to drain every last drop of it. Luke was 24 when he died, civil engineering student at Texas State. Strong kid who came home between semesters to patch fences and string wire in July heat. The southeast pasture was his favorite corner of the ranch. Best sunrise in Dry Creek. One morning we sat there with coffee and he pointed to that exact patch of ground and said, "If I ever build a place, it'll be right there." 6 months later, he died in a rodeo accident in Amarillo. I put his ashes in that spot. Best sunrise on the ranch. 8 months before I buried my father, Linda had come to my cattle gate with purchase offers. $250, then $300, then $4, then $500,000 for less than an acre. Every time I said no. Last visit, she stood at my gate and said, "That patch of dirt is costing you more than it's worth." I looked at her and said, "For you, maybe." I never told her why that land mattered. Some things don't belong in conversations like that. If you've ever fought to protect something that truly mattered, follow for what happened next. It gets much bigger before it gets better. Next morning, I called Martha Keene, best land attorney in Kerr County. 5 feet tall and mean enough to make developers lose sleep. She walked the south line, checked the permits, studied everything, then said the one word that bothered me most: permitted. No contractor pours that much concrete without paperwork. Martha started pulling records and 2 days later spread county permits, HOA meeting minutes, reserve fund statements, and contractor filings across her desk. Willow Creek Estates was nearly broke, burned through reserves on lawsuits, failed landscaping, contractor debt. Property values sliding, homeowners getting loud and restless. The pool wasn't a luxury, it was bait. Something shiny enough to prop up home values and distract everyone from the rot underneath. The contractor was Blue Crest Leisure LLC, brand new company. No history. Registered 6 months prior with financial ties to Linda's husband. That's when bad judgment started looking like fraud. I called my Uncle Ray, retired surveyor, 76 years old, sharper than most men half his age. We walked the southeast line before sunrise with GPS equipment. 3 original iron boundary pins were gone. Not bent, not buried, gone. Ray ran the coordinates, checked the county plat, straightened up and said 2 words. 43 feet. That's how far they'd shifted the property line, exactly enough to fit the pool. Then he checked the drainage slope and shook his head. The HOA permit claimed the pool controlled stormwater runoff, but Ray's instruments proved runoff flowed away from the subdivision, not toward it. The drainage claim was a complete lie. That's when something clicked. Luke had surveyed that pasture for a college engineering project. I climbed into the equipment barn loft and dug through boxes untouched since he died. Under rusted chain and broken tools was a cardboard tube in Luke's handwriting. Southeast Survey. Inside were detailed engineering maps, elevations, water flow models, original coordinates for every boundary pin, all drawn in his hand 12 years ago. Ray spread the pages across the workbench and went completely still. It was all there. Proof the boundary had been moved. Proof the drainage claim was fabricated. Proof my son had documented the exact truth of that land long before Linda ever showed up with her checkbook. One note circled in the margin beside the spot where his ashes rested read simply, "Best view on the ranch." Ray looked at me and said quietly, "Your boy's about to testify." Then Evelyn Shaw called, former HOA board member who'd resigned 4 months earlier. We met at a diner off Highway 16, and she slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were internal emails, meeting minutes, bank transfers, and one document stamped, "Not filed yet" in red. Emergency Public Necessity Petition. Linda's plan was classifying the pool as critical flood control infrastructure, so the county would force a permanent legal easement over my land. Permanent legal theft dressed in bureaucratic language. And worse, one email mentioned an overflow drainage pipe discharging directly into Harper Creek, the creek feeding my cattle and irrigation. Chlorinated pool water pumped straight into my water supply would poison half my lower pasture. Then Martha played an audio recording from an HOA board meeting. Linda's voice came through flat and cold. "Move Harper's line. He's old. He'll fold. We just need county approval before he gets back." The room went very quiet. Share this before you read the ending. What Linda didn't know about that lockbox is something else entirely. We had 24 hours before the county hearing that would make everything permanent. That night I drove to the south line and found fresh industrial PVC stacked beside the pump house and trench markers, pointing toward Harper Creek. I set trail cameras and went home. By 10 that night, footage showed 2 men working by flashlight. Pipe half installed, retaining wall cracked open, and lying in the mud beside the trench was a small metal lockbox knocked loose during excavation. Luke's lockbox. He'd mentioned burying something out there years ago. Sheriff Boone arrived, looked at the trench. The recovered firearm. One of the men dropped running. Then at the lockbox in my hands and said quietly, "This isn't trespassing anymore." By sunrise, we were in Martha's office with Luke's muddy lockbox sitting in the center of her desk. I opened it. Inside was his rodeo buckle, a Polaroid of us stringing fence in summer heat, his ROTC dog tags, and one folded letter sealed with tape. "Dad, if you're reading this, I'm either gone or too old to remember where I buried it." He wrote about the pasture, about the sunrise, about how every inch of that southeast ground drained naturally toward Harper Creek, not away from it. He'd been running erosion models for his engineering final, and included the calculations in the letter. Handwritten, dated, signed. Martha cross-checked the letter against his survey maps. Perfect match down to the decimal point. Luke had buried their entire case 12 years before they ever hatched it. At the county hearing, Linda spoke first. Calm voice, smooth lies. The pool prevented flooding, served public safety, required emergency easement. Trevor Madsen swore the overflow system was nearly complete and fully compliant. Sheriff Boone stood and handed commissioners photographs from the night before. Fresh trench, half-installed pipe aimed at a protected waterway. One recovered firearm, 2 men in custody. Trevor went pale. Martha laid out the original deed. Ray's GPS findings, 3 missing boundary pins, 43 feet of stolen property. Luke's survey maps, Luke's letter. The drainage calculations proving the permit was fabricated, and the pipe plans showing illegal discharge into Harper Creek. The county environmental officer looked up and said that discharge violated state water protection code. Linda started talking too fast, blaming contractors, citing paperwork confusion. Martha pressed play on the recording. "Move Harper's line. He's old. He'll fold." Silence so complete you could hear the ventilation running. Evelyn stood from the back and handed over the financial ledgers showing kickbacks, shell payments, and reserve fund theft. Commissioner Denton put his hand flat on the desk. Petition denied. Criminal referral issued. Environmental hold on the pool. Title review expedited. Trevor looked straight at Linda as Boone moved toward him and said, "She told me to do it." Judge Malalari heard the title action that same afternoon, reviewed everything, then asked Linda one question. "Did you know human remains were interred on this parcel?" She hesitated. That was enough. he ruled from the bench. The southeast pasture was legally mine, always had been, which meant the pool sitting on stolen private land now belonged entirely to me. Every tile, every pump, every inch. Next morning, I called Tanker Joe Bledsoe, biggest water transfer rig in 3 counties. Told him I needed a pool drained. He asked where. I gave the address. He laughed so hard he hung up, then called back and said he'd be there by noon. Linda showed up screaming I couldn't do this. I held up the court order. Actually, I can. This is private property. Joe dropped the intake hose into the deep end, and 21,000 gallons of HOA water started disappearing. As the level dropped tile by tile, the natural slope of Luke's ground came back into view. For the first time since I'd come home, I could see where my son rested. Linda was arrested before sunset. Fraud, conspiracy, environmental violations, trespass. Trevor took a plea. Blue Crest dissolved. 3 county employees suspended. I converted the shallow end into a livestock trough, fed by my well. The deep end stayed empty, a concrete monument to what greed looks like when it finally runs out of road. I brought Luke's things back out and buried them again by hand, slow and careful, right where they belonged. Set a simple steel plaque in the ground above it. Luke Harper. Still home, that was enough. Later, the cattle came down slow and curious, stepped into the shallow end one by one, lowered their heads, and drank quietly, standing in a loose circle around Luke's ground like they were keeping watch. For the first time in 12 years, it didn't feel like a grave. It felt like a ranch again. My grandfather bought this land in 1954 with nothing but a discharge paper and enough stubbornness to build something lasting. My father kept it alive through drought and debt. Luke mapped every inch of it and buried the truth in a metal box in the ground. Linda Mercer thought she was building a luxury pool. Turns out she built the most expensive cattle trough in Kerr County, and she built it for free. Follow for more stories about land, family, and the people who find out too late that some things aren't for sale.